All right, welcome back to our TCI studio. That time of year, Will, where we get to start focusing on the college football playoff. Tuesday night, first rankings roll out from the only poll that matters. And thought this year, now that we got the studio, we'll spend a little bit more time. We'll kind of do a preview each week of what we think might happen when the committee rolls out their rankings, and then we'll do another one after the rankings and talk about what they did and how things might change. Been a lot of uproar from Clemson Nation this year as Tigers start number one, and then we're winning big every week and seem to just start dropping in the AP poll first, and then the coaches poll kind of followed that.
Yeah, that to me is the most mind-boggling thing. I could understand some, I'm still one to believe if you win the game, you should keep your ranking, but I can understand some, though, if, it's a 1 point win, that they would fall one spot. But to continue to have one game where they didn't play maybe their best, continue to hurt them as they go through the season is just the most crazy thing. And as I mentioned several times in our stories, first time since 1977 that the preseason number one ranked team has dropped as far as Clemson has in the polls without losing a game. I mean, that's just amazing to me. The outside perception, and you hear it like, oh, well, Clemson, you hear, I even heard it on one of the broadcasts where Clemson had that 1 point loss to North Carolina. Well, they didn't lose.
No, they didn't. Well, and this is the one that matters. You talked to Heather, I think Friday, ran the story on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows the committee better than Heather. She's there with them every year, every weekend. And the committee looks at these things a lot more thoroughly than the typical AP voter, typical coach. They look at the whole game, every game. They look at all this other data. They look at offense. They look at defense. So to me, I've been interested to see where Clemson is in this first ranking, because that's when the first ranking, obviously the committee's a little bit different each year. They have some guys roll off, some new guys roll on. That first ranking is going to give us a feeling Tuesday night for, what's important to this committee.
Yeah, and before we get too much into what Heather says, I give you kudos because your stuff's pretty good. I mean, I read your who's in the other day, and that's really good stuff.
Well, we write the road to New Orleans this year. Who's in? We'll roll that out every week, and that's just what we started doing that, I guess, about 4 years ago, and it gives somebody one place you don't have to go to ESPN and look at everybody's different schedules. You got all the contenders, you got their schedules, mm-hmm. What's left, you got kind of what's going on with each conference. So we want to give you one place to go try to gather all that data.
Yeah, check it out if you haven't. Robert does a good job with that each week, and it's really good stuff. And you kind of hit the nail on the head, I think, in most of that. And what Heather was saying too was that Heather Dinich, as Robert was talking about, she was telling us that when the committee gets together, they don't look at just, wins and losses. First of all, every member in the committee gets every game broken down into 60 minutes. So it's every play that they watch. When Dan Radakovich, Clemson's athletic.
I wish I had that.
Well, yeah, me too. When I was watching him, I remember when he was on the committee a few years ago, we were in Raleigh. This would have been 2017, I think. He was up there in the press box waiting on the game, and he was watching other games that had already been played, and he had the whole game in there. And so he's sitting there just kind of going through watching the game, and it's like, man, I wish I could watch a game like that fast, Mm-hmm. But that tells you, though, how dedicated he was to making sure he's doing what he's supposed to do. And the other committee members, they take it very serious as well. And so they watch every game, and then when they get in there, Heather was telling me they have what's called relative stats. So if they want to pull up, Clemson's number one in pass efficiency defense, how does that compare to this team? Or how's Clemson in pass efficiency in overall defensive efficiency? They can pull up all these stats that they want that will help them decide when they're comparing two teams. And generally, that's when she said they do it. When they're
You mean they're actually going to look at defense?
Yeah, they're going to look at defense. And Heather said, and we'll talk more about that Clemson's defense, from a comparative standpoint, has been every bit as dominant as Alabama's offense. But all you ever hear about is Alabama's offense this year. But when you look at what Clemson's done defensively, it's been as dominant as any team in the country. And she says the committee will look at that, and it will be given consideration.
All right, so you were talking to Heather Friday. Mm-hmm. And Heather was telling you, well, gosh, as I look at this more, one of the biggest questions may be where's Alabama ranked compared to Clemson. That may be the big question going into the rankings. And then as I saw on her Championship Drive show Sunday, she actually had done her more research over the weekend and actually came out and said her prediction for what the committee will do, not her prediction on what she would do, but the committee, she believed Clemson will come out number 3 and Alabama number 4.
Yeah, and a lot of that she said as she was talking to me, and me and her were going back and forth, was one was Clemson's strength of schedule compared to Alabama's strength of schedule, and she said, they're very comparable. However, she pointed out that Clemson's played 3 road games, Alabama's only played 2. Also, Clemson's best non-conference win is against Texas A&M, a Power 5 school. Theirs is Duke, which is a Power 5 school, but on a neutral field. And so she's like, there's some, when they look at it, Texas A&M as a non-conference opponent is better than anything Alabama's played, and that's one benefit for them. And then, of course, the defensive efficiency for Clemson is a big deal too. And the main stat, which everybody has talked about, and this is the one that really
kind of defense. They don't look at defense.
Yes.
Will they look at interceptions and offense?
And that's where I'm going. You know where I'm going. The main stat, she said, that really kind of was a wow factor to her was looking at the fact that, okay, Trevor Lawrence, everybody's made a big deal about Trevor Lawrence throwing 8 interceptions. But they've only given up 1 touchdown off those 8 interceptions. And that 1 touchdown came with 6 seconds to go in a game they were leading 24-3 against Texas A&M. And she says that just shows how dominant Clemson's defense has been, that Trevor Lawrence has made some mistakes and it hasn't hurt him. It hasn't cost them anything. And she says the committee will look at that, and that goes into every bit of what Alabama has done to this point as well with their wide receivers and Tua. That to them, that's just as impressive. This is not any better than that one. And then when you throw in Clemson's strength of schedule, which is the same, but Clemson's overall opponent's record is way better than Alabama's opponent's records. And I think she thinks the committee will lean toward Clemson when it's all said and done.
Well, and I think, she's debating Clemson 3, Alabama 4. I think most people agree Ohio State, LSU are going to be 1 and 2. I think she thinks, and a lot of folks think LSU, because they've had a tougher schedule, will come out number 1 in the first ranking. Ohio State, who's got a better schedule than Alabama and Clemson, will come in number 2. Personally, I think LSU's overrated. I think they're getting a lot of credit for beating teams like Texas, which we all know is not that great.
Not
Florida,
right.
which I thought was way overrated, and we saw that Saturday, and even Auburn. So they really haven't beaten anybody outstanding. Now, of course, compared to Clemson, I guess they have. But Ohio State, they're the one team of that 4 teams that also has had an impressive defense. LSU's defense has not been impressive at times, been bad. Alabama, they give up 30-some points to Arkansas, I think.
Yeah, gave up 30-something points to Arkansas, and then they also gave up 28 to Texas A&M. A Texas A&M team, Clemson really held to 3 points, in my opinion. But yeah, I think the two, and she said it, the 2 most complete teams is Ohio State and Clemson. She said Clemson's number 3 only because of its strength of schedule. That's really why Clemson's number 3. And so what she told me was that Clemson is fine. There's going to be that debate too, and you'll hear this on Tuesday night. Well, what is the committee going to do with Clemson, Alabama, and Penn State? Because Penn State's got the best wins, and you're going to hear people say that and talk about that. Heather says the committee is smart though. They watch every game, as we said, and they do use part of the eye test into their what they see. And they look at Clemson and Penn State and Alabama and Penn State, and they see Penn State doesn't have the talent those 2 teams have, that if they played on a neutral field, they would believe Clemson and Alabama would beat Penn State head to head.
See, that's where it gets gray, because it's like, okay, over here we got to use the eye test, but we're not going to use the eye test for, Clemson, Ohio State, and LSU, because to me, if you use the eye test there, Clemson will be higher than 3. It's selective on when they want to use the eye test, but I think that top 4 is pretty much what we're going to see.
It's going to be those 4 teams.
It's probably going to be Penn State right on the outside looking in.
Correct.
The big question tomorrow is Heather right, and is Clemson number 3 or are they number 4? The big thing from a Clemson fan, obviously, if you win, you're going to be in that top 4. You're going to be in the playoff. But the big concern for us and for all the Clemson Nation out there is you'd much rather be making that trip to Atlanta, and we could be actually home some on Christmas Day instead of having to go out to Arizona maybe on December 21st, because remember the game is on the 28th this year, so
7
everything
days.
pushes up a little bit. Really gonna mess up a lot of people's holidays if they have to go to Arizona.
The teams too.
So if you're Clemson and you're not number one, which you're gonna have a lot of things fall in place to be number one. There is a path to get there, and we'll probably get into that more here in the next couple of weeks if it looks like that's more realistic. But if you're Clemson and you're not number one, you're likely going to end up being 2 or 3. You want Ohio State to be number one.
Yeah, there's no doubt you want that, is because Ohio State has a big alumni base in Arizona, as we all saw when we went out there for the Fiesta Bowl a few years ago. So they're going to pick Arizona in the Fiesta Bowl if they're the number one. That means who's ever number 2 and 3 is going to go to Atlanta and play in the Peach Bowl, and you want to be 2 or 3. That's really, right now, as long as Ohio State's sitting above you, you want Ohio State to get to that one spot. So this game this week between Alabama and LSU, if Alabama's 4, I don't think the committee's going to jump Alabama over Clemson and Ohio State. They may jump them over Clemson if they beat LSU. But I don't think they're going to jump Ohio State and move to number 1. So if you really want Alabama to be number 4 this week, so Ohio State has that opportunity to jump up to number 1, because that's what will happen. And then if that happens, you want everything to stay status quo, and Clemson plays Alabama in the Peach Bowl, and then that'll be a good thing for Clemson.
Yeah. And once you're in there, you just want to get there, but obviously you prefer to play in Atlanta. This year is a little bit different, where all 5 of the Power 5 conferences still have a legitimate chance of getting a team in there.
Yeah.
Pac-12 with 2 one-loss teams, those guys are on a course to maybe play each other in their championship game. Even though Oklahoma's got a loss, you still got Baylor in the Big 12. Those guys are going to play at least once, maybe twice. So every conference has a chance to get a team in there. Last year at this point, the Pac-12 was already pretty much eliminated. Of course, last year you had Notre Dame in there as well. So there's a lot of teams kind of in the mix right now. Start to, narrow itself down a little bit this week. Of course, the loser of the Alabama-LSU game is going to be interesting to see next week. Are they 4? Are they 5? Does Penn State move ahead of them if Penn State wins this week? So that'll be one of the big scenarios. But, we'll find out Tuesday night where Clemson lands in this first poll committee rankings, and then we'll have a lot more to talk about later in the week based on those rankings. The other thing Heather talked about, which I think is important, she likes to talk about, it's not just about the top 4 or 5, it's about the top 25, because the committee uses, and they don't care what the team was ranked when you play them. They care at that point in given time, how many of those top 25 teams have you played and have you beaten?
Yeah.
And so if you're Clemson, you want Wake Forest to be in there higher. I expect Wake Forest to be higher in the committee rankings than they are in either the AP or the coaches poll, because I don't think they're getting enough credit. So, but you care about that. You care about Texas A&M. Do they slide in there? So you care about the teams you played or gonna play in that top 25.
Yeah, and we've seen in years past where the committee has put a team in that you didn't think was going to be ranked at that point in time. And so I'm with you. I think Wake Forest is going to be in that top 20 when it's all said and done this Tuesday night in that first poll. And that's good for Clemson, because if Wake Forest wins this week at Virginia Tech, maybe they can move in that top 15. And the reason that's important is, unlikely, even if they were to come to Clemson and Clemson do to Wake Forest what they've done to everybody to this point for the most part and beat them soundly, I don't think that's going to drop Wake Forest enough out. I think Clemson will get the respect it deserves for being Clemson, and Wake Forest will get that, well, they played Clemson. And so they would probably fall back a little bit further. Because one thing that really gets me in the AP poll is, here's Florida at 7-2 and Auburn at 7-2, and they're 6-2, I should say, and they're both ranked ahead of a 7-1 Wake Forest and a couple other 7-1 teams, and even 8-0 Baylor.
Well, and that's the other thing you're going to see. All these overrated SEC teams and the other 2 polls, they're not going to be as overrated in the committee poll, I don't think.
I think you're
exactly
correct.
right. You're going to see some of those teams slide back a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you're going to see all those guys jumbled up in there. I mean, the top, what is it, like, I know Auburn's sitting there at 11, and then there's Florida at 10, and there's Georgia at 6. I'm like, I don't know if I don't think Auburn and Florida deserve to be there.
No.
I think they need to be back in the top 15, and I think the committee will do that on Tuesday night. And I think Wake Forest will be rewarded for that, because that loss now to Louisville doesn't look as bad for
Well,
them.
and Louisville, don't be shocked if Louisville's in the top 25
Don't
in
be
the committee
surprised.
rankings, where they're not in either one of the polls that are currently out.
Exactly, and that's what's so interesting about this, that the committee's so different than everybody else, because they take everything into account. They don't just have their one opinion. And let's be honest, the SEC's got so many guys ranked because the AP poll put 7 guys. I may be a little over exaggerating there, but they put like 5 or 6 guys in the top 10 before the season even started. And you're like, really? Are they really that many top 10 teams? I mean, you're not giving anybody else, in my opinion, from a perception standpoint, a chance when you do that. That's why I've always
But Georgia beat Notre Dame by 1 score.
I know.
That same Notre Dame team that almost lost to Virginia Tech this week.
It makes no sense. And
Penn State team that's undefeated that almost lost to Pittsburgh earlier in the year.
Pittsburgh, 3-loss Pittsburgh was at the 1-yard
Yes.
line against Penn State to go in for the winning score.
We haven't heard a lot of talk about that. We hear all kinds of talk about North Carolina having a chance to take the lead with a minute and something to go, which still gave Clemson plenty of time to score, even if they did that.
Pitt was knocking on the door with a chance to win the
You
game.
don't hear anybody talking about that, and
Yeah.
yet they're undefeated, number 5 in the country.
Yeah, no, and that it goes again, and it's like nothing against Ohio State for what they've done, because I think Ohio State's looked good to this point, but Ohio State gets praised for how, look what they did to Wisconsin and all, look what they did to Michigan State, but those teams don't have any life on offense, and I'm like, okay, but were they really challenged? Because they couldn't keep up with Ohio State, because you knew at some point Ohio State's going to break through and score on those defenses.
Yep.
You got to have an offense to match them. There's nobody in the Big Ten that matches Ohio State. I think that's why I think, even though they look good and they've been dominant, that I think who they're playing is some reason why. And I think the ACC Coastal, I know it sounds crazy, Robert, but you may tell me I'm nuts right here.
Nuts.
I think they're a little better than people give the ACC Coastal credit for.
Well, they've been better out of conference.
That's what I mean. I don't think they're like going
to.
I don't think they're going to challenge Clemson for the championship or anything. But I think they're more competitive than people give them credit for. And I think North Carolina proved that in the game against Clemson. I think Virginia Tech proved that against Notre Dame this past weekend. We've seen Pittsburgh outplayed Penn State and should have won that game. So I mean, it's not as bad. Virginia, I think Virginia is a very good football team. It doesn't get the credit it deserves. People like to make fun of it, but I'm interested. I think if the Coastal Division played some of those other teams that Alabama and Ohio State and LSU and those guys have played, I think some of those teams would beat some of those teams. And then then how good is Ohio State's schedule? How good is LSU's? I think Virginia could beat Texas. I really do. And we hear about is LSU and how impressive that win was Texas, and it was. But Texas still almost lost to Kansas.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
So let's just, it's going to be a fun top 25. I like what you said there. It's the top 25 we need to watch out for, because I think it's going to be very interesting. It's just not those top 4 teams.
All right, we could go for hours talking about this.
Absolutely.
We'll be back later in the week to talk about it a lot more. Tell you, Will and I both right now strongly believe Clemson is the best team in the country, although they're not going to be ranked as number 1 team. A lot of these people that have been trashing Clemson going to be eating a lot of crow come December. But all that matters is win, get in there. We will have another video from the studio after the rankings come out. They come out actually, I think, 9 o'clock Tuesday night, and between the basketball games that ESPN's showing, so they can try to get everybody hooked on basketball. Will's actually going to be covering the Clemson basketball game Tuesday night.
And then I'm going to run over
opener
here
with Virginia Tech. So we'll figure all that out. But Gavin and I will be here to cover all the stuff for you on the announcement and get all that stuff out there. And we'll have a lot more to talk about after the first real poll comes out Tuesday night. Stay tuned to the Clemson Insider. We'll try to bring you our thoughts as we start the road to New Orleans.